Say, didn't you tell us about one of your god-smarked skills that had the chance to give you additional things from enemies? You should try that out before we move on. Trust me, you don't want to be around here when the smell starts to get even worse. Graphus made a good point, but Xander was loath to have to touch any part of the field of corpses in front of him. Pragmatism eventually won out, but only barely. Yeah, I guess you're right. I just don't want to touch them. This better be worth it. Xander gingerly stepped past the former barrier of flames, now marked only by a line of burnt grass, and began touching corpses at random. After about 5 minutes of the sickening activity, something happened. Somehow he could feel that Heaven's bounty had activated. Xander watched, fascinated and horrified, as the corpse he had touched began to fold in on itself, as if it were being sucked into a black hole. Soon, nearby goblins and parts of goblins were being sucked into the vortex. The wet crunch of corpses being compacted caused Xander to dry heave again, as the other mercs and a few of the caravan workers and scholars watched in morbid fascination. Eventually, the phenomenon stopped sucking in corpses after clearing roughly 20 feet of the field. In the center of where the vortex had been crushing the bodies was a fist-sized green orb, appearing to be filled with roiling smoke. With a small pop, the vortex ceased existing, and the orb dropped to the ground. Carefully, Xander picked it up and opened his status. You have defeated enemies bonus experience awarded for first defeat of an enemy of this type, Artificer leveled to 5. Soldier leveled to 4, Demolitionist leveled to 2. Heaven's bounty has created an object. Orb of Slaughter, drive one target into a mindless rage. They will attack the closest living thing to them. Orb currently has 1 charge. Kills until next charge, 10. Artificer level 5 skills. Ferrokinesis, move a metal object without physical touch. Mana cost dependent upon weight of object. Reduced cost for created materials. Mana cost, low-high. Rune etching. Additional runes have been added to Library of Known Runes, Soldier level 4 skills. Earthworks. Create a raised or depressed area of ground in a designated area. Mana cost is proportionate to the size of affected area. Mana cost, low-high. Cooldown, 20 minutes. Demolitionist level 2 skills. Explosive effect. Slain enemies have a small chance to explode at 1/4 the effectiveness, as if they had had reactivity cast upon them. Ability does not take effect if caster or allies would be within the blast radius, or if the caster does not wish it to. Xander relayed the effects of the orb, as well as the name his status window had given it, and the fact that he had leveled up. That's a nasty-sounding orb, commented Atrax, driving things into a rage with power fueled by killing other things. Definitely a fitting name. I suppose the rage fits the theme of the goblins as well. Handy against a group, though. Suddenly turning one of their own against them can break up just about any cohesion a group might have had. Good find. I'm jealous you have the ability to get things like that. Though, I'm not sure I want to watch or hear any more goblin compaction. Yeah, neither do I. I get the feeling that I'm not going to get anything else from the skill right now, and even if I was, I'm not sure it would be worth it, having seen what I just saw. Let's just get the hell out of here. Do you think we took out enough of them that they'll leave us alone? Xander did not want to have to deal with this again. His stomach ached from heaving after already losing its contents, and the smells were becoming a personal hell for him. And it was far, far too easy to recall the screaming of the goblins as they had burned. He just knew he would be hearing it in his mind tonight while trying to sleep. At least for now, though I worry that there are still enough in the overall horde for them to attempt again once they discover that we are interfering with one of their food sources, posited Fraze. The rest of the caravan seemed just as keen to move on as Xander did. Not even considering how the place would start to smell soon, a slaughter of this magnitude would soon draw a plethora of predators and scavengers. Best not to be around for that. Everyone had had enough fighting for the day. A few of the workers had been injured, though none too badly, thanks to the mercenaries thinning the tide of goblins. A few nasty bites that needed to be sterilized and then bandaged, simple injuries that could be treated on the move. They had moved as fast as the animals would allow them to, and had made good speed away from the site of the goblin attack with the remaining daylight they had. Camp was set up the same as it always was, and dinner was doled out. Some of the tension had eased, as the consensus was that the goblins were unlikely to make another move tonight or within the next few days. Stories and boasts were passed around the workers who had broken into small groups around their fires. Who had saved who, boasts of which one of them had killed the most goblins. No one boasted to the mercenaries, who were around their own campfire, though. The killing field they had created to protect the caravan still had many of the members of the expedition awed. The scholars discussed what they might find in the ancient ruins, what kingdom or race it had belonged to, and more than one theorized the origin of the incident involving the creation of the orb. Xander found himself on the first watch shift and distracted himself by patrolling and practicing ferrokinesis, causing a small metal marble to float, circle his body, and perform various maneuvers in mid-air proved to be a good source of entertainment. He was able to get a good amount of velocity behind it as well. The ability had the potential to launch darts, or maybe even his grenades, if he spent enough mana or gained more power and control as he leveled. After being relieved from his shift, he collapsed into his sleeping bag and quickly fell asleep, exhausted from the day. The next morning came too soon. Xander awoke to the sounds of the camp beginning its morning. He still felt drained and groggy. He knew they would be packing up and leaving soon, though, so he dragged himself from the comfort of his sleeping bag and the inflatable mat under it. At least packing up was a quick affair when he could simply roll things tightly and then pop them back into his inventory. Feeling too lazy to actually make his way over to the cart that was serving breakfast, Xander made do with his own personal stash, preparing one of his few precious MRE coffee packets. He was going to have to find out if coffee or something like it existed here. Mornings were not his thing. The other three mercs seemed in a similar state to Xander. They'd all exerted themselves in one way or another during the fight and were feeling the effects of that this morning. Atrax haggardly packed up his bedroll before throwing it in the closest cart, climbing in, and laying back down, using the bedroll as a pillow. Graphus seemed to be in better shape. His class must provide him a source of endurance or something similar, but he was still letting out jaw-cracking yawns as he prepared his pony for the day's journey. Frezé still hadn't managed to make her way from her own bedroll. Graphus pulled the roll out from under her once he had finished his own packing and was met with grumbled curses as Frezé slowly stuffed the few belongings she had pulled out the night before into her bags. Shortly afterwards, the caravan was on its way again. The caravan master reckoned that they would reach their destination by the end of the day and could begin setting up a staging area for the research and clearing of the ruins. Xander just hoped that there would be somewhere he could wash himself. If there wasn't, he would make one. He could create water, though he wasn't sure if it would hydrate someone who drank it, considering the restrictions the ability had on food. It should do just fine for washing grime and blood off, though. He was feeling beyond greasy at this point. The last leg of the journey was uneventful. Lunch was, as usual, taken on the road, and the expedition reached the ruins before the light had died. In front of them was a large mound, reminding Xander somewhat of a Native American burial mound. A few obelisks still stood, lining what might have once been a road leading to the mound. Most were in pieces and on the ground, though. Words that Xander's speak in tongues was unable to translate were carved on the blocks. The line of obelisks terminated at a stone doorway set into the side of the mound. The doorway was mostly overgrown with brush, as was much of the mound, but the outline of the large arch was still visible. As soon as the caravan stopped, the 5 researchers that had come along were investigating the stone obelisks, discussing the origin of the language, and taking rubbings of the carvings. The working theory was that it was an ancient dwarven ruin, possibly founded during the diaspora they had experienced after a devastating civil war, which was followed by a poorly timed conflict with an elven kingdom. The workers of the caravan were beginning to unload many of the crates, unpacking them to reveal large tents, desks for the researchers, and various other amenities for a semi-permanent camp. The mercenaries might only be here long enough to secure the area and wait for the arrival of more mundane guards, but the workers and researchers would be spending a long time wringing every bit of information they could out of the site. Xander waited with the other three mercs, who were alternating between observing the setup process and scanning the area of the mound and nearby forest to ensure that nothing caught them unawares. "So, what do you think it is?" asked Xander. "Looks like dwarven ruins," answered Graphus. "Been to a couple of cities that had a similar entrance, though those were still inhabited. Most of us dwarves don't like to move unless we have to. For the whole place to fall to ruin, something would have had to happen that would either force the population to move or killed so many that they could no longer maintain it. No idea what, though. Earthquake, war, massive pocket of underground gases, hell, they might have hit one of the Underhive roads, exposed themselves to a war with one of the kingdoms down there." "The Underhive? What's that?" "That's what the race of bug people who live in massive tunnel systems and caves call themselves." "Graphus, they're called insectoids, not bug people. Don't be rude," interjected Fraze. "Yeah, whatever." Graphus brushed the comment off. "In case you can't tell, I'm not very fond of them. There's been a lot of conflict between dwarven kingdoms and Underhive fiefdoms over the years. It's less common now, but skirmishes still happen and tensions stay high. I will admit that the Underhivers have become somewhat less isolationist in recent years. They've begun to allow trade in and out of their lands for the first time that anyone can remember." "Uh-huh. Well, I hope it's not bug people. Not interested in starting a war with anyone, thank you very much. I hope it was just, like, an earthquake or something." The idea of a race of underground insect people living in some kind of extensive tunnel or cave system was a little concerning to Xander. It was sounding like you were taking a potential risk just digging a hole in this world. If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.